The girls, the drugs, the guitars on fire, the huge amplifiers, his death. I'm talking about Jimi Hendrix, Mr. James Marshall Hendrix.
Yes. Welcome to the GOZA podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the one and only Jimi Hendrix. So, was he really that good?
Okay. Check this out. 1966, Hendrix lands in the UK. His first week there, he hops on stage with Eric Clapton. And at that time, Clapton is God of the guitar. And Hendrix, he just gives it his all. He's, pulling out all the stops. He's playing behind his head. He's humping the guitar. He's doing the whammy bar and the whole 9 yards. He's doing the whole Jimi Hendrix thing. And he does a killer performance. And after the show, Eric Clapton can't even light his cigarette because he's shaking in shock. That's how good Jimi Hendrix was.
Wow. That's crazy.
And it's crazy that it took him going to the UK to get famous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a trip.
And then when he went back to America and made his, debut as this huge star, it was Paul McCartney that got him the festival.
Really?
Yeah, so it's like the Brits just totally understood it. Wow. And I think that's the thing about Jimi Hendrix, right? A lot of people, either they just don't get it or they completely get it. Mm-hmm. And so prior to him going over to the UK, America didn't get it.
Right.
Jimmy's just, he ain't shit. He's just doing gimmicks and being loud and humping his guitar and stuff,
Yeah.
But then the Brits, they ate it up.
Right.
They got it.
I wonder if that had anything to do with his blues background and being that rock music is British musicians trying to do the blues. And so I wonder if it had anything to do with that, of why they understood him so well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Especially guitar-based music is rooted in the blues. Mm-hmm. So this is another thing that makes Hendrix so special, because at that time in the 60s, they were taking blues and they were making it faster and louder and creating what we call rock and roll. Mm-hmm. And that's what the Brits were doing. They were listening to all old school blues musicians. When Hendrix was actually hanging out with those blues musicians and playing with them and opening for these guys like Little Richard, bands like that he was playing for. The UK was already on that natural progression. Mm-hmm. And Hendrix was even ahead of them. You know what I'm saying? Like the UK was ahead of America, and Hendrix was even ahead of the UK.
And where do you think he got that from, like that style of being so ahead of something that was being developed in real time?
By practicing and practicing. See, that's the thing that a lot of people don't always talk about, right? Is we want to talk about Jimi Hendrix like he's this mythical alien. But the truth is, the guy was the best because he wanted to be the best. Because he was always playing guitar. And what Hendrix means to guitar players is different than what it means to, rock and roll fans. Of course, everybody loves Hendrix, but for guitar players, it's like a lineage, so to speak, of the craft.
So like lineage as in passing down styles, or just like somebody who is so influential? Like, what do you mean by that?
Okay, so that's a great question because, again, we're talking about the blues and how it went from blues to rock, and from rock it went to metal and punk and everything else, and it just kept going, right? But it came from the blues, and Hendrix was such a pivotal part of rock and roll's development as a whole, because he did things that, opened up the field for everybody else. Mm-hmm. Hendrix went over here. He said, hey, we can go over there and explore this territory. And then everyone went over there. And, it's like he opened up these gates. So blues music, it's very basic and it's very soul-driven. And it's not a lot of technique. And Hendrix being a student of the blues, he was unorthodox. And that, unorthodox approach, again, opens up possibilities. It's like, because you are limited in your knowledge, you have to rely on your creativity. As opposed to other people go learn theory so that they can, play different chords and whatnot. But that's not what Hendrix was on. Hendrix was on some whole other stuff,
Wow.
Yeah, so, and what he was doing, nobody was doing that at the time. You got to remember, like, that was so far out for people.
Burning guitars and just really taking that to the next degree.
Yeah, and it is pretty crazy that he burnt the guitar too, because there's some kind of, sacrificial symbolism there going on.
Really? Oh.
I mean,
what do you mean?
I think, it's a spiritual endeavor. He's dedicated his life to the craft.
So much so that he is worthy to burn it on stage.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, like, the first time I saw that, and I was pretty young, the first thought that came to my head was like, well, that seems just kind of like disrespectful to this instrument.
Right.
But now that you put it that way, it's like, if there's anyone who can burn a guitar, it's someone like him.
Right.
That is beyond the instrument.
Exactly. And I mean, this is taking it too far or whatever, but it's almost like a sacrificing of your child or something, that's how much he's connected to the music, to his guitar. And we see all this like humping guitars and lighting guitars on fire and all this drug taking and all this masculine stuff, but people forget, too, that he had such a vulnerable side to him. A very human side,
Yeah.
And it showed in his music. He was able to capture that in songs like Little Wing, or The Wind Cries Mary, where he's talking about different, relationships, and Castles Made of Sand, where he's talking about his mom and his dad, and, that's where his songwriting really came across.
Right.
So he was the full package deal, He is the perfect guitar guy because, he did it all. Every single box was checked off.
Right. It's interesting to see interviews of him because he's probably one of the most reserved rock stars in an interview setting. The guy just looks so humble, so almost uncomfortable to be on camera.
Right.
And on the spotlight. But when he's got the guitar in his hand, he's like, he becomes something else.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you wouldn't think that he would be this shy person and this reserved person.
Right. But
it took that type of personality to be able to do what he did on stage.
Right.
He couldn't express himself verbally as he wanted to, so he had to do it through music, and he unlocked a form of expression that connected with millions of people and still does to this day. And as far as like the lineage thing, going back to that, because I really like that. So there's I think the UK understood that this guy was part of the lineage. This African-American kid, Jimmy's got the blues. He's black. He grew up in poverty. He knows suffering. He's experienced racism. That type of, it needs soul. The blues music needs soul.
100%.
That's why you can make a guitar cry, And so he possessed that, but he also was taking it where the UK was already taking it, like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. They're getting heavier with their songs, and they're turning up louder. And the Who was like a huge influence, because the Who was already doing crazy stage antics. But Hendrix did it in almost a musical way.
Right.
It's like when I see the Who perform, they're smashing their instruments. When I see Hendrix perform, he does it like at this time and space within the performance where everything's kind of blurry, you know?
Right.
Like he's in between worlds.
Like it's part of the musical performance.
Right. It's just another extension.
Setting the guitar on fire is just as important as the first lick.
Right. And it depends on how he feels, you know? And he went through phases in his career where he kind of stopped doing gimmicks like that. You know, he got tired of it because that's what people were coming to see. They weren't coming to hear with their ears anymore.
Oh, interesting.
And, you know, I think he was kind of sobering up a little bit, not partaking as heavily as he was before. He was kind of cleaning up his act, you know, after coming famous off those first 3 albums, you know, and touring and just being, boom, shot into stardom. So, you know, around the time of Woodstock, he starts cleaning up his act, and, you know, he's got Billy Cox and on bass, and Billy's more of a straight guy. Like, he ain't gonna play no shit, you know? So Hendrix was also expressing that in his music, and he was doing a little bit quieter stuff, and, you know, he was going through evolutions, and we just forget that.
Right.
When he played at Woodstock, he had a full band with him. He had another guitar player on stage. He had conga players. You know.
That's crazy. I didn't even know that.
Right.
Because the most famous performance of that morning was the Star Spangled Banner, which was just him.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we could talk about that for a second, too.
Yeah, why did he play so early in the morning? That seems like a really weird time to put, like, the headliner. Wasn't he headlining Woodstock?
Yeah. So the reason that Hendrix played so early in the morning, there's a couple different theories. Okay, so one of the theories is that they weren't paying the bands, and so Hendrix wasn't going to go on until he got his money. That's the story that I'd like to believe.
That sounds pretty accurate for some promoters.
That's the juiciest, right. And then, you know, another one is that he was supposed to go on at midnight, but everything was getting pushed back. So it's like, all right, Jimmy, do you want to go on at 3 a.m. in the morning or 8 in the morning? So he chose 8 in the morning, you know? And so there's like a couple different theories out there as to why he went on at 8:30 in the morning. But there was not even half the people that were there a couple days before.
Right, that's what makes me believe, like, that it had something to do with money. Promoter issues. Because why would anyone choose that time when everyone's so far gone and sleeping and left? Like,
right.
But wow, what a perfect time, huh?
Insane. And then you got to remember, too, something that people don't even think about is the lighting for the cameras, because it's all documented, right? Was perfect. 8:30 in the morning, that sun is just natural light coming in. So if he would have went on at 12, the footage would have been,
wow.
You know?
Especially back then.
Yeah, I think there are performances of bands at night, and they don't look good. You know, it's so cool that we have that documented.
Yeah, it's historic.
Yeah, and he was only famous for 4 years.
Gosh.
And the impact that he left. You know, and I like that. I want to go back to this lineage idea because it's important to understand the effect that his music had on guitar players in general. To me, you know, his successor is kind of Eddie Van Halen. Now,
really?
You wouldn't think so musically, okay? It's not about musically. It's about pushing the boundaries, you know? Van Halen would have never been inspired as a little kid without Jimi Hendrix.
Oh, really?
I mean, all the guitar gods that he listened to, you know? It's just the lineage. And so Hendrix's spot in the lineage is so prominent that it influenced people like Eddie Van Halen to go to that next whole level. Because the other people, they were breaking boundaries, but not like Hendrix.
Right. Someone so pivotal.
Right. And so he opens up this rock and roll world that guitar players can start living in. That Eddie Van Halen could start coming out and doing even crazier stuff. You know what I mean? Because people flipped out when they heard Hendrix.
Right.
If they would have heard Van Halen before Hendrix, they wouldn't even got it. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
People have to be exposed. Like the barrier gets pushed further and further and further. Mm-hmm. And he's still influencing people to this day.
Yeah. What's up with that? Like, every guitar player, I feel like, has to try and play a Jimi Hendrix song. Even if it doesn't sound good, they do it and they're happy and they're proud and they're stoked. Like,
right. There's two reasons to that, okay? So guitar players learn the Hendrix songs because we want to know, what did Hendrix know? And you start to understand that, okay, you can learn all the Hendrix songs note for note, and you're still not going to learn what he knew. Because he unlocked that himself, It's like those notes put together in that way by that person is like sacred geometry. Like opening up this portal. Now there's this thing in the world called Jimi Hendrix that lived and left this great music, an imprint on this world, So we all trying to get to there, But then when people cover Jimi Hendrix, it has to do with the lineage again. You are proudly paying respect to the lineage, to the craft, to the heritage of what we do, of rock and roll through guitar.
Wow. I just got chills.
And that's why people do it so proud, even if it sounds like crap.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And it's funny that you're saying that because I was just watching the John Mayer. He did this thing where he did a trio band, a blues trio band. He wanted to do a SRV Hendrix type of thing.
Okay.
And what song was he? Yeah, he was playing, I think, Gonna Have to Wait Till Tomorrow, whatever that song's called, but you nailed it. He wasn't performing it really well. It wasn't a version to remember at all, but he was so happy and proud.
Right.
And especially a guy like him, right? Because he came out in this pop world to this market, and you got to market yourself. So they're marketing his music, acoustic, soft, vulnerable side to little girls, and it is what it was, and it was marketable. But he wanted to prove himself, I'm more than that. I could play Hendrix,
Mm-hmm. Going back to what you were saying about, getting famous for just a short period of time. What do you think that must have been like?
At the point that he shot out of the ground, he was working for years and years and years underground, and then when he shot into mainstream, he shot straight to the top. Mm-hmm. There was no middle ground. The Beatles, there was a progression, you know what I mean? They got to experience smaller clubs and bigger clubs and bigger clubs, and that growth. As opposed to Hendrix was you ain't shit to all of a sudden you just killed Eric Clapton, which is God.
So how did that happen? How did he get over to England?
So this bass player from this band called the Animals saw him perform and snatched him up. I'm going to be your manager. We're going to the UK.
He was his manager?
Yeah, his first manager.
Okay.
And that's how he was able to hop on stage with Eric Clapton and stuff.
Right away.
Yeah, because it's another famous musician that Eric Clapton knows goes up and says, hey, let this guy play. And you do not tell Eric Clapton, let this guy play. No one just jumped on stage with Cream back in that day. That was the band. They were really respected, And people were saying Clapton is God.
Wow.
And Clapton didn't like that. He didn't dig it.
Oh.
You know what I mean? It's cool for fans, but if that was you, and then Jimi Hendrix comes all along, and you're like, I'm not trying to be God or nothing. And so he
Right.
was put into this like subjectivity that he didn't really want, you know?
Right, because then that puts the stakes on you to just always be that way, and that's humanly impossible.
Yeah, and Hendrix had a lot of respect for Clapton and a lot of friendly competition. Like, he really liked Clapton and, like, wanted to, you know, up his game. And even one point, Hendrix was playing and Clapton's in the audience. And, you know, Hendrix has his Stratocaster and it's way out of tune. And Clapton, of course, knows all about Stratocasters. He knows how to tune them up and stuff. And Hendrix is like, "Is Eric out there? Can he help me tune my guitar?" Like, you know. And I guess the story, Eric's just like, "Nope, no way," you know. And
So they were good friends.
they were friends, you know. And
That's good.
Eric Clapton was pretty intimidated by Hendrix. And it caused him a lot of turmoil.
So it took them a while to get to that like friendly point, maybe.
I think it was just more one-sided. You know, I really think like it was just Clapton having to deal with his own stardom and his own ego and
Like internal struggle.
yeah. Like he was
Interesting.
pushed into that, you know, Clapton's God, and now all of a sudden Hendrix just killed you, you know? Like he didn't ask for that,
Right.
you know? And supposedly Clapton had a guitar that he wanted to give Hendrix and didn't get the chance to give it to him because Hendrix passed away before he was able to give him the Stratocaster.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
What kind of guitar was it?
A Strat.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, Fender
Just
Strat.
like a badass, like probably custom.
I don't remember the story. There's a story behind that guitar, though, and why that guitar was the one that he wanted to give him.
Where is that guitar now? Do you know?
No, I don't.
No idea.
No idea.
I wonder if he held on to it.
I don't know.
It's probably worth a lot of money.
But I think Frank Zappa had the guitar that Jimi Hendrix burned.
Oh, yeah?
And I think now Frank Zappa's son, Dweezil, is in possession of it.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I mean, what he just did for the guitar, you know, that's why you can't dispute that. Music is subjective, but you cannot dispute what he did for the guitar. You know, how far he took it along.
Right.
And I'll die on that hill.
Yeah.
I'll fist fight someone over that. Because, you know, like I was thinking about our what we're going to talk about today, and you could talk about it surface level, and, you know, of course, Hendrix was so cool, and you go into the Hard Rock Cafe, and there's a picture of him, and, you know, whatever. But when you're talking about the craft, you know, that I've dedicated my life to, it takes on a new meaning. And when people achieve great things, we're talking about anyone who's done anything great. There's a level of dedication that once you've dedicated yourself to that, then you're worthy of greatness.
Right. It's like you have to pass that human threshold because no regular person will go beyond that point.
Right.
There's just too much going on in the material world. You got bills to pay, you got things to do, people to meet, you got to sleep and relax, and there's so many different distractions.
Right. And I think that's why Hendrix also relied on drugs. To shut all that up and focus on what he wanted to focus on, and that was music.
And I think it's true for most musicians. Musicians have this affinity to drugs, and I think because they are so obsessive about this art, that something that's similar to that feeling of addiction
Right.
and passion and losing yourself is is something that can take a hold of you and pull you in.
Right. It takes a mindset. And that's why, like you're saying, maybe that's why so many musicians do partake. And, you know, unfortunately, the truth is that, you know, drugs and rock and roll do go hand in hand. They don't have to, but a lot of times they do.
And people who usually have an affinity towards drugs have some traumas.
Oh, yeah.
Some hard life.
No, I think Hendrix wasn't really happy, you know? And it's the crazy soul search, because we're all here thinking where Hendrix got is the place to be. And he got there and he still wasn't happy. It ain't really about that. You know what I mean? You can become a powerful creator and you can dedicate your life to greatness, and that's so respectable. But once you get there, don't be fooled. And so I think the night he died, maybe, you know, when he was in that dream state in between worlds and his body was struggling, I think he might have had a choice, you know, conscious choice. Maybe I'll go check out over there. You know, I've done a lot over here in my short life, in 27 years. Everything he accomplished, right? So he was not afraid to go somewhere else. And in those 27 years, there was a lot of trauma and a lot of things happened to his life. You know, all these things shaped who he was to make the music that he did. You know, his mom died when he was young. His little brother, child services took him.
What?
Yeah. And so he's living with his dad, and he decides to join the army. And he injures himself platooning out of an airplane, or a helicopter, I mean.
What? I didn't even know he was in the army.
Yeah, so he's in training, and he jumps out, and he breaks his ankle. Okay? This is a butterfly effect. You know what I mean? Some nobody was about to go to Vietnam War and be another black young American died in the war, you know? But butterfly effect, something else happened. He breaks his ankle, gets sent home, and, you know, starts to pursue his music career.
Wow.
Yeah.
Moment of grace.
Yeah. And now he's young, and he's over in Tennessee. And he's playing the whole Nashville, Memphis, all that circuit. This is when he starts hanging out with these blues guys, and, you know, and he's doing his thing, but still, he's not getting the credit he deserves. Right. You know, they're letting him hang out. They're letting him play. Little Richard has him in his band, you know. But still, you ain't the top dog, you know. You still ain't shit, Jimmy.
And I wonder if these people sort of sensed that there was this giant just sort of in some kind of slumber.
Well, they had to have, right?
And so these people are like, oh no, you're nobody, you're nobody, you're nobody.
Right. And so, like, that's part of his shy timidness, you know, Little Richard telling you, like, don't be doing that stuff, playing behind your head and stuff, you know. And so, but he still knows who he is.
Right.
So when he's in the interviews, even when he's famous, he's still that little kid kind of, you know,
Wow.
And then when he gets on stage, he's like, but this is who I really am, and I know who I really am.
Wow, that's really something to learn and remember.
Right.
It's like, I think that's happening to everyone on a micro level. You know, whether it's your boss or some family member or landlord, like people constantly saying, no, you're not greater than what you are. Stay where you are.
Right. It's the material world trying to tell you that you're something other than you really are.
Right.
So that you don't actualize your true self,
Wow.
you know? You know, that's what makes people great, because that never stopped. Even when Jimi Hendrix got famous, that never stops, you know? Mm-hmm. The world trying to tell you who you are. Mm-hmm. And he goes over to the UK and, you know, just overindulges. They're giving him more drugs, you know what I mean? And he doesn't care about money. Right. So they're ripping him off.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
All he cares about is making his music, you know? And here's the funny thing, too, is, you know, of course he's a rock god. He's a sex symbol, you know? Flamboyant, crazy antics. Women love him. But he was still shy. Mm-hmm. He was still that shy guy. You know, he got all the women he could ask for, but they came to him. Mm-hmm. You know, there's stories where he talks about, like, when they first started, you know, and this is all new to him. Like, he checks into his hotel room, and all of a sudden there's a girl, someone knocks on his door. He opens up the door, and a girl's just there naked, like, "Hi, are you Jimi Hendrix?"
Oh, my goodness.
You know, and
Gosh.
it's just funny because we see him as, like, this, you know, sex symbol, like, get all the poon in the world, but that's not really who he was. And the women in his life also were important. He probably had kind of like mommy issues because his mom passed away early.
Right.
You know, he even had his main girlfriend, like, before he got famous, and he's living with her, you know, and he's doing, this is how dedicated he is, that he's willing to be with a girl who's sleeping with men for money to pay the bills, because he can't pay the bills because he's trying to become a rock star.
What do you mean sleeping with men for money?
His girlfriend was a prostitute.
What?
Yeah.
Like, for real?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's that whole, like, starving musician, like, syndrome, you know? Mm-hmm. He was the full deal. You know, the loser that sleeps with the girlfriend, like, that stays at the girlfriend's house, and the girlfriend makes all the money, and the only way she can make money was prostituting. So, I mean, talk about pay your dues. This is why he is a rock god, because he came from shit.
Yeah.
You know, the stereotypes that musicians have, you know, he lived it. He had to go through that stuff, being a broke musician. And, you know, there's always going to be that conspiracy theory that the girl that he was with the night he died intentionally killed him. People are going to say whatever they're going to say, right?
Right. No one really knows.
Right.
What's that conspiracy?
Well, he took a lot of her sleeping pills. And you're supposed to have, like, one or half of one, and he took, like, 10.
Yikes.
So, I mean, I don't know why you would give him 10 sleeping pills. You know what I mean? And then took him over to a friend's house at, like, 2 in the morning, picked him up at, like, 3 in the morning, and then he was dead in the morning, the next day, you know?
Gosh.
And what did he do at that friend's house? Like, no one, you know?
Right.
And there's, like, just a lot of dark stuff in the music industry.
Right.
Like a death clause in a record contract, which basically says, you know, we are able to take life insurance out on you, and there might be a time when you're worth more money to us dead than you are alive.
Oh, gosh, that is so sticky.
That's a sticky subject.
Yeah, that shouldn't be allowed.
So
do you think he had that in his contract?
I have no idea. But how these record labels work is they hand you a contract that's their dream list, their wish list. So it has everything in their favor, completely screwing over the artist. Right. And in those days, you know, people hadn't gotten ripped off. The consequences hadn't developed yet of signing a bad deal.
Right. Our artists weren't even prepared for the amount of screw over.
Exactly.
that was about to happen in those times.
Right. Now it's standard. Okay, record label gives you a contract. First thing you do is you go give that contract to your lawyer.
Right.
And then, your lawyer crosses out this, amends that. They give it back to the record label, and it goes back and forth.
Right.
You think Jimi Hendrix had a lawyer in 1966 coming fresh out the club, 23 years old, 24 years old?
Oh, it makes me feel sick.
I mean, he didn't know anybody,
By the way, guys, if you like the podcast, don't forget to subscribe. We're coming out with content like this, at least, once a week?
Yeah, as much as we can.
Much as we can. We love to talk about music. And music.
Yes.
Was Jimi Hendrix really that good? Take a guitar player like Stevie Ray Vaughan. You think he's technically better than him?
Well, see, the thing is that Stevie Ray Vaughan wouldn't have even been around without Hendrix. It goes back to that lineage, right? It's like I dare you to ask, if we could, Stevie Ray Vaughan that question. Are you a better guitar player than Hendrix? He would laugh. In complete humility, he would laugh. Mm-hmm. And technique-wise, Stevie Ray Vaughan might be able to play faster. Mm-hmm. He might be able to play more notes, but he didn't unlock what Hendrix unlocked. The thing about Stevie Ray Vaughan was he was very a homage player. He paid homage to the greats. That's why he always played Hendrix songs. Mm. And so what he did was he paid homage, and he did it really, really well. A guitar player more like Hendrix went into uncharted territory. And that's why he is technically, yes, a better guitar player than Stevie Ray Vaughan.
So how impactful?
Yeah, it's the impact. It's the impact factor. Technique is for sports, not for music.
Interesting.
We only learn technique on our instruments to better express ourselves. That's why you could play super fast, but it doesn't make you a good guitar player.
Not necessarily great at expressing yourself.
Right, and
whereas
that's
somebody with just holding this beat and playing, singing something like the blues.
Right, and don't get me wrong, that's not to say that fast music can't move you, you know.
Right.
It's to say that they're two different things. The ability to play fast and the ability to move someone are two different things. If you could do both, awesome. But in sports, technique, you have to be able to play fast. You have to be able to run down that freaking field. You have to be able to shoot the ball. There's a level of technique that has to be accomplished. When you break that 4-minute mile, you're creating a new reality.
Wow, yeah, you're creating a new reality.
Because that was never a reality before.
Right.
That's what Jimi Hendrix did with his music.
Opening a portal.
That's what he did with the guitar. He opened up a portal so we can all walk through.
Wow.
It's like, they asked Paul McCartney, who's your favorite guitar player? What's he say? Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah?
He didn't even say his boy George Harrison.
What?
Oh,
yeah. Wow. Yeah, didn't he play a song at the concert that we went to?
It was a tribute, and it wasn't, I don't think it was a Hendrix song. I think it was inspired by riff. Yeah,
that's what it was. He talked about the day that Sgt. Pepper's came out. Hendrix was also playing a show, and he had learned one of their songs that morning to play it. And the way Paul McCartney told this story, it was one of his biggest pride and joys of his life, that someone like Jimi Hendrix took the time and rushed it to play it And I think it was his opening song for this concert, right?
Yeah, I think you're right.
And he mentioned how and the way he plays his guitar is like it totally made his guitar go out of tune. And like to someone like Paul McCartney, who's a seasoned musician, knows that that's like, don't play the song that's going to make your guitar go out of tune. But he did that.
The very first song.
He did that.
So by the second song, he was completely out of tune.
Yeah. And he was just so proud of being able to say that story.
Right. That's where I heard the story with Clapton.
mind-blowing.
It was that same concert. McCartney told the story that, that's when Hendrix says, "Oh, is Eric out there to tune can he help me tune my guitar?"
Probably after playing
The
Sgt.
first
Pepper's.
song after playing Sgt. Pepper's. Because, Hendrix wanted to give it his all. So
Yeah.
he's in the moment, he's doing his thing with the whammy bar for Sgt. Pepper's, the song, to really give it his all, he's going to put the full Jimi Hendrix stamp on it.
Yeah.
Without thinking, to the next song.
He was playing his homage
Yeah, absolutely.
to the what did you call it? The lineage.
The lineage, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah, Hendrix was very aware of the lineage and kind of the guys that were passing down the lineage or living, in that day, which was the Eric Claptons, the Beatles, the Bob Dylans. He loved Bob Dylan.
Oh, really?
And that's another thing about Hendrix. He could take a cover song and really make it his own. When I first heard All Along the Watchtower, it took a couple years before I learned that was a Bob Dylan song.
Oh, yeah. I always forget that that's a cover.
Yeah.
And most people think that it's his original song.
Yep. And I mean, the guy does 3 back-to-back solos right in the middle of it. You're talking about a folk acoustic song that he just flips and turns it into this, sounds like a Vietnam protest song or something, Like, it really stamped that day and age. And he's got these 3 back-to-back guitar solos, and they're all very meaningful solos. It's like little solo, little solo, little solo. And he takes you here, and he takes you there, and he takes you there. He's not just jamming.
Right, without sounding like a solo. Like, that's a really great point. A lot of music, you're like, you already know the solo's coming. You're like, okay, this is the time. And then the guitar player does his solo, and then it goes back in the song. And it's just very, cookie cutter. You're almost like, I don't want to hear this solo. But, you don't even know that he's soloing. It's just part of this, music.
It's like as opposed to playing a song like Voodoo Child, where it's very guitar solo all over the place. But this thing that he did in All Along the Watchtower, like you said, it was a musical composition. It wasn't a jam. And it sounds so good.
Yeah, you would never think it's a cover.
Never.
What better cover is there?
That might be the best cover song ever.
Right. Yeah.
I'd be willing to take that opinion.
Yeah. Let us know in the comments if you can think of a better cover song.
Right.
Say someone's never heard of Hendrix, never heard of his music. What would be the first song that you would want them to listen to?
I would have them listen to Voodoo Child, because that would help me prove that he is the best guitar player. Because that song, you cannot listen to it without being somewhere else, without being projected, into another realm. Jimmy shakes you and brings you in with his voodoo guitar playing. And that's the last song that he ever performed live. And the last words that Jimi Hendrix sang on stage is, "If I don't see you again in this world anymore, I'll meet you in the next one, and don't be late."
Oh.
And those are the last lyrics to Voodoo Child.
Oh my gosh.
So maybe that's the song that Jimmy would want you to hear too.
Makes me want to cry.
That song is life-changing. Now that's the one that's like, okay, he is the guitar god. But I would also show them, the next song would be say The Wind Cries Mary or Castles Made of Sand. Castles Made of Sand is the first song that I ever heard. And Castles Made of Sand, he shows that he's a prolific songwriter. The lyrics, the melody, the music, and he shows that vulnerable side. And then when it gets to the solo, he still lays it down, out of this world solo, lets you know he's the full package deal.
Wow. If you were able to say one thing to Jimi Hendrix, what would it be? And what message do you have for the viewers, the musicians, anyone who's watching that maybe we could take away from Jimi Hendrix's life?
Yeah, definitely. So if I could tell Jimi Hendrix one thing, the only thing it would be thank you for your art and your dedication, because who am I to tell him anything? You know what I mean? At the end of the day, he was just another human being. And as far as to people listening in, it's important to pass this music on to next generations. And it will pass on by itself without anybody having to do anything. Kids will keep on discovering Hendrix, you know. And one thing that Hendrix always preached was peace and love. You know, at the end of the day, he was a hippie. And he was in that time and that culture. And what we can learn from him is to push the limits, push the boundaries, but be mindful of your edges, bro. Don't fall over the edges. Because, you know, I'm not going to tell you not to live your life. I'm going to tell you to try and be conscious of what you're doing. Because it seems that Hendrix wanted to be unconscious to a lot of realities that were impending on him. He just wanted to play guitar. And he did.
Yeah, he did. All right, there you have it, folks. The greatest guitar player of all time, Jimi Hendrix. Until next time.